Whenever we have a collection like list and map, we want to retrieve all the items at once, not by accessing with index or keys at a time. So in such situation, we actually use a structure which is called a loop. For example, if I tell you to print all the numbers in the console, then what would you do? So you can simply print each number by accessing each item with an index, or we can actually simply call a loop structure. So in Dart programming language, we have multiple loop structures. Um, for example, for loop, while, and do while. So now let me talk about for loop, and we use this for loop very frequently in our application, and we also use while and do while as necessary. So now the problem is, now if I tell you to print all the numbers or retrieve all the numbers and print them in the console, we can actually use a loop. And the loop structure in that programming language is very simple. So we can use two types of loop. One kind of loop is the traditional for loop, where we can actually initialize a value, then check the conditions and increment or decrement. And another for loop is a very simple syntax which actually iterates all the items from a collection. So let me define the old and traditional for loop. So the syntax is, you have to write for, and then you have to initialize a variable, and the target is to retrieve or get each item from this list. So I have to access each item through the index. So the index will start from 0, and the last index will be the length minus 1, one less from the length. Okay, so now I have to define a variable of type integer. So int I equals 0, then I less than marks dot length, then I plus plus. And now I am simply printing the marks, and for index I am passing I. So this loop will continue unless it is less than or unless it is equal to the marks dot length. So at initial stage, the value of I will be 0, and the loop will be executed, and the condition will be checked because 0 is less than 1 2 3 4 5 6. So 0 is less than 6. So this will be printed on console. So at index 0, that means initial value is 0. So at 0 number index, we will have our 65. If I run this, for example, let me run this. Okay, so these are the outputs, and now after printing the first element, the ith value will be incremented by 1, and it will check whether it is less than the length or not. If it is, then it will print the next item. So in this way, the loop will keep continuing unless it is equal to length. So in this way, we can actually print all the elements, or we can actually have all the items from a collection. But there is some problem with this loop, not a very big issue, but the problem is at every iteration we need to check a condition, and then we have to make an increment by ourselves. So this is kind of manual thing that we do for this kind of for loop. But whenever we have a situation that I need to iterate or get all the items from a collection, there is no point or no need to provide how much we need to increment or how long the loop should iterate. So we don't have to specify this because I need all the items from a list. So in this situation where we want to iterate all the items from a collection, we can actually use another form of for loop, which we often call as enhanced for loop or for each. But the syntax is quite similar. So the another for loop syntax is for, and then I had to specify a variable. So int, for example, mark, and then call in and the collection. So this is a very simple form if you compare this syntax with this one, it is very simple. And now if I print the mark directly, then you will see the same output. So let me remove, not remove this, let me compare these two things. Here what we are doing is we are passing the entire collection over here, and then for loop will actually retrieve every item from this marks collection, and it will put it inside this mark variable. And I have used this data type integer because the list type is integer. That's why. So for loop will retrieve or extract each item at each iteration, and it will put it inside this mark, and will simply print the mark variable. And in the second iteration, the second item will be extracted and will be put inside this mark variable, and that will be printed. So whenever we have a situation where we want to iterate all the items from a collection, we should use this form of for loop, because we don't have to specify the increment, or we don't have to compare or check a condition, or we don't have to initialize an initial index, and so on. So in the same way, we can have all the items from this map also, if you want to have all the values or all the keys. But we know that in the previous video we saw that there are useful utilities method to print all the keys and all the values from a person map, so we don't have to run a for loop to get all the values of a person. So we use a for loop most of the time. We have whenever we have a collection, maybe we retrieve some data from our database, we made a query, and now we have a list of collection or a list of items, and then most of the time we use this for loop to get every item and show the items on the screen. There are other loops that I mentioned earlier, that we have a while loop and we have a do while loop, but you will see me less doing or less using those loop structures, because most of the time we use this for loop, whether it is enhanced for loop or the traditional for loop. But you should know the syntax of while and do while as well, because you don't know when it comes handy. It actually depends on many situations where you will find that maybe a while loop will be more suitable than a for loop. So if I want to perform the same operation, that means I want to print all the elements from this collection by using the while loop. So the syntax will be, let me remove these lines from here, and now let me write the while loop structure. You have to simply write while, and now you have to provide a condition. So first of all, you need to provide a condition, and based on this condition the loop will iterate. And for that I have to actually declare a few variables, because if we don't do that, then we cannot compare. So for example, let me introduce an integer type variable like int index equals 0, and now I have to provide a condition while index is less than marks.length. Remember, we did the similar thing for traditional for loop. So now I have to print the marks and provide the index variable as the index, and also I have to increase the value of index after each iteration, and eventually it will print the same output just like this one. So these lines will be executed as long as this will be true. So initially index will be 0, and 0 is less than 6, so this will be incremented, or this will be executed, and after each iteration the index value will be incremented. And this is like the another version of for loop. Like we are initializing a value, we are checking a condition, then we are incrementing. So all these stuffs are actually, we find them inside of traditional for loop. Okay, so if I run this, the output will be same. And there is another loop which we call a do while. So still we will need this index variable, but the syntax will be a bit different. For example, first of all, we have to write do, sorry, we have to write do and then the loop body, and then we have to specify a condition like this one, so while. So in case of do while, you see that the condition is checked at the end. So inside this do, we will simply print the marks and index as well, and also we have to increment the index number. And if I now run this application, I think you will not see any change in the output. But the main difference between while and do while is, in case of while loop, the condition is checked first, and if the condition is false at the first place, the loop will not be executed. But in case of do while, if the condition is false, this loop body or this loop will be executed at least once. For example, if the index value is 7, for example, if the index value is I mean 7, it will try to iterate or execute these lines, because we are actually checking the index value with the length of marks after just one iteration. So if I now run this application, it will eventually throw an exception, because it will try to retrieve or extract a value at index 7, and we know that there is no index like 7. So it will try to execute this line, and now we have an error. And this is actually the difference between do and while do, or while simply. So in case of do while, the condition is checked after the first iteration, and in case of while, the condition is always checked at the first place. So if the condition is false at the first place, in case of while, the loop body will not be executed.